listening, if you're still listening. Taking a quick break. We'll be back at 2 o'clock with more speakers. We have Stanley Kurtz. Yes, the Stanley Kurtz coming up at 2 o'clock, followed by Robert Murray on energy policy. Then there will be a discussion involving several people who are here today, and then Rep. Dan Itza. We should be done sometime right around 4 o'clock, and as I said, we'll have another speaker at 2, so stay tuned. Everybody's taking a quick bathroom break and a little chat, as you can hear from the background noise. But we're here, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to stick it out until the end, so stay tuned. Oh, and at the very end, 4 o'clock, we're going to interview Stanley Kurtz, so stay tuned for that. And this is, of course, GrokTALK.
GrokTALK.
Oh, feel the power.
Oh, I can feel it.
Our moment of triumph approaches! It's
GrokTALK.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now, at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
GrokTALK.
feel the power.
Oh, I can feel it.
Our moment of triumph approaches! It's
Yeah, that was close. No, you did fine. I got back 7 seconds left. So.
If there was something to watch, like a camera.
Nah, well, you know, the big red flashing with the declining numbers, it's not a bomb. Sometimes I don't even notice it, to be honest with you, and I use this thing every week. You can put your headphones on if you want. We could actually have a conversation, you know, while we're waiting. Then the other people can hear you through your mic instead of mine.
That's even better.
Oh, I know. You probably sound better, that's for sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Right, there you go.
I was busy munching like a good old munchkin on my lunch or lunch part deux. So, Mr. Santillan does a pretty good job of a speech, but tends to run a little long, I think.
Oh, hang on, what do you got?
We're going to get ready to start the program, so if you want to go ahead and make your way back to your table, or if you suddenly realize that there is some great seats up front now available, you can go ahead and make your way to those tables as well. As we get introduced you to some other new people.
This is why
this next person is the Senior Fellow at Ethics and Public Policy Center.
Listen to
He also serves as a contributing editor at National Review Online, where he covers a wide range of issues, including education reform. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a nice round of applause to Stanley Kurtz.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here on what I think is a very important day for New Hampshire and for the nation. As we all know, today is the day that Hillary Clinton is going to try to save her campaign by going on to Saturday Night Live. We've got a few hours to kill before then, so I'll speak. All right. So many of us nowadays are worried that we may be losing our country. We're worried that the things that make America work and the things that make America great may somehow be slipping away. That America may be caught in a fundamental transformation that's moving more quickly than we can even keep track of, much less stop. And sadly, that feeling is all too justified. As an example, I'm going to talk to you today about an issue which is certainly important and yet which doesn't get the kind of attention reserved for controversies like Obamacare, the Iranian nuclear deal, or funding for Planned Parenthood. I'm talking about the survival of local government in the United States, the right of local or state governments to control what your zoning regulations are, what sort of roads, housing, and schools get built in your towns, what kind of local taxes get levied, and even what your children actually get taught in their schools. Of course, these kinds of things have always been local or state responsibilities. The Constitution leaves these sorts of decisions to the states, and the states traditionally delegate most of these decisions to local governments. Now, for a long time, people have considered this reliance on local government to be an absolutely fundamental key to America's freedom. In fact, it all began here, of course, in New England. The early colonies were almost like little countries unto themselves. They were controlled locally, not by kings back in England. And even when the English kings finally started to assert their control, they limited themselves to certain central powers. They gave up power to the localities because New Englanders, unlike so many of their own subjects, were already used to governing themselves, already accustomed to their freedom. And of course, when the English started to step on that freedom, the colonists kicked them out. Now, when Europeans came to visit the United States in the early decades of the 1800s, they were shocked to see American government working from the bottom up instead of from the top down. And the ultimate in bottom-up government, the most amazing thing of all to these European visitors, was the New England Town Meeting, which of course has been going on here in New Hampshire for about 375 years now. It was when those European visitors first began to notice New England town meetings and how different they were from anything these Europeans were used to back in their own centrally controlled countries, that the meaning of American liberty started to become clear. because Americans were used to governing themselves, were confident in governing themselves, and were proud of governing themselves. They refused to accept the kind of infringements on their liberties that people in other parts of the world put up with. And the place Americans learned the most about that freedom was in their local governments, like in those town meetings. And that, of course, is how you got Live Free or Die here in New Hampshire. But local government, this key to what makes America American and what makes America great, is perilously close to slipping away. And it's happening in ways that barely get noticed and barely get talked about in our major national debates. Now, the first example of this problem I want to talk about today is a hugely transformative new housing regulation issued by the Obama administration with very little discussion. It's called, and this is a mouthful, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Regulation. And it's not too strong to say that this regulation goes a very long way toward abolishing local government in America. The Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule amounts to a kind of backdoor annexation of America's towns and suburbs by nearby big cities, with the whole process monitored and managed by the federal government. And the second example I'm going to talk about today is the way that the College Board, the private company that creates the SAT tests and all the high school advanced placement tests, has been taking us very far down the road to a national school curriculum. A national school curriculum controlled by the political left. And this is something the College Board has been doing with considerable help from both state and federal government. Now, everybody knows that President Obama began his career as a community organizer, but very few people understand the projects that young Barack Obama was actually working on during his community organizing days. It turns out that the community organizers who trained and mentored President Obama were the founders of a movement called regionalism. Basically, Obama's mentors worked in cities, and they didn't at all like suburbs. Obama's mentors blamed the suburbs for the problems of the cities, because when people move out to the suburbs, they take their tax money with them. So the goal of Obama's community organizing mentors was to redistribute suburban tax money to the cities by having cities literally annex their surrounding suburbs. Now, this is actually what happened as a lot of large American cities like New York and Chicago were growing during the 19th century. In those days, as they grew, cities like New York and Chicago would just annex the nearby towns. Now, if big cities across the country started annexing and absorbing nearby towns and suburbs, this would shift America away from a system of local governments that stay close to the people to a system of huge regional governments centered around major metropolitan areas. Well, of course, things have changed since the 19th century, and the leaders of the regionalist movement quickly discovered that nowadays cities aren't allowed to just annex nearby local governments without their consent. So when the regionalist community organizers who trained and mentored Barack Obama found out that annexation just wasn't possible anymore, they started to work on Plan B. They started to look for ways to undercut the political and economic independence of the suburbs so that they could somehow get a hold of all that suburban tax money and redistribute it to the cities. And the program these regionalists came up with had three basic elements. First, do everything you can to discourage people from leaving big cities to move to smaller towns or suburbs. So, for example, some cities like Portland, Oregon, actually draw a boundary around themselves. It's called an urban growth boundary. And outside of that boundary, new development is banned. You can't build new suburbs or towns outside of Portland's growth boundary. And in other cities, regionalists tried to achieve essentially the same thing by cutting off money for highway building or highway repair and channeling that money instead into public transportation. In fact, I think we're going to hear another presentation a little later that touches on this. Now, if part one of the regionalist program is to discourage people from leaving cities, or even to press them back into the cities, the second part of the regionalist program is to move many of the urban poor into the suburbs through the imposition of low-income housing quotas. And the third part of the regionalist program is to institute something called regional tax-based sharing, which we see in its pure form in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. In Minneapolis-St. Paul area, suburbs have been forced by the state to kick in a big chunk of their tax revenues to a common regional pool. And once that money gets pulled, it's redistributed according to a formula that pulls most of that money away from the suburbs and back toward the cities. Well, if you press suburbanites into the cities and you transfer urbanites to the suburbs and you redistribute suburban tax money to the cities, then in a sense you've abolished the suburbs. The municipal boundaries would still exist, but for all practical purposes, the towns and municipalities that surround big cities would have been co-opted into a single metropolitan region. And again, that's why people call the movement that favors these policies regionalism. And President Obama, like the people he worked with all those years ago in Chicago, is a strong supporter of the regionalist movement, as are a great many officials in the Obama administration, especially in places like the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Transportation. Now, there are all sorts of ways in which President Obama's hugely ambitious new rule on affirmatively furthering fair housing aims to fulfill the goals of the regionalist movement. I can only give you a few examples here. I've written a lot more about it at National Review Online and elsewhere. President Obama's affirmatively furthering fair housing rule gives the federal government a lever to re-engineer every American neighborhood, imposing a preferred racial and ethnic and class composition, and making new development much more urbanized, much more densely packed. Under this new federal regulation, towns and suburbs are going to become more like cities, and cities are going to become more like Manhattan. They're going to get more crowded and more dense. And to achieve all of this, the affirmatively furthering fair housing regulation casts aside the authority of local governments over their core responsibilities on everything from zoning to transportation to education. So, for example, this new rule forces every municipality that accepts federal housing money to compare their population by race, ethnicity, and class to the population of their entire region. And if there are any imbalances in the demographics, then these localities could be forced to sweep away their own zoning laws, build high-density public housing at their own expense, and import population from other parts of the region. Meanwhile, other localities could be forced, on pain of losing their federal funding, to join regional planning associations that adopt all the basic city planning goals of the regionalist movement. In other words, under the Obama administration, the federal government is going into the business of telling Americans where they should live. In fact, all of this is happening right now in suburban Westchester County, New York. And amazingly, the biggest controversy of all is taking place in Hillary Clinton's hometown of Chappaqua, which is in Westchester County. This is where the Obama administration is trying to force the local town council to build high-density, low-income housing at its own expense and import tenants from nearby cities. Yet Hillary Clinton has so far refused to comment on this controversy, and no one in the media and no one among her political rivals have yet asked her about it. But if Hillary Clinton becomes our next president, then President Obama will have handed her the ultimate tool for re-engineering the United States, a regulation that makes a mockery of America's long and proud tradition of local control, a regulation that actually puts the federal government into the business of telling Americans where they ought to live. All right, now I'm going to shift to what might seem like a totally different issue, but what really isn't a different issue at all, because it's all a question of local control. The Constitution left control of America's system of education to the states. And while the states hold final authority over American education, they have traditionally allowed local school districts to have considerable control over how their schools are run. Nowadays, however, I'm sorry to say that all of that is changing. Control of the school curriculum is slipping out of the hands of localities and even of states. Through the Common Core, huge national testing consortia, funded and controlled by the federal government, are removing our schools from the influence of the families and communities who actually use them. Now, I'm sure you've heard all about Common Core. We've heard about it today, of course. But the truth is, Common Core is only the beginning. What most people still don't understand is that the vast government-supported expansion of the high school advanced placement program has put the College Board in a position to impose a de facto national curriculum on our high schools, a curriculum that covers absolutely critical topics like American history, U.S. government and politics, European history, world history, literature, and a great deal more. And as the College Board puts its new curriculum in place, it's handing sharply left-leaning college professors, the ones who advise it, a way to take control of K through 12 education in America. Now, I've already talked about the way in which our federalist system, our system of state and local control, cultivates the taste for freedom. But there's another reason why our federalist system is so critically important to this country. The founders understood that breaking up central control and allowing for choice and variety at the state and local levels was the surest way to guarantee that no single political faction could impose a tyranny on the rest of the country. Local control of our schools means that no one side in our political battles can force their ideas on the minds of their opponents' children. But now, that critical bulwark of our liberties is under attack. And let me explain how it happened. Until about a year ago, if you were teaching advanced placement U.S. history, all the College Board would have given you by way of instruction was a 4 or 5 page topical outline. As long as you taught about the Mexican War, the Jacksonian period, the Civil War, and so forth, you could teach those topics pretty much any way you wanted. You could teach American history from a liberal perspective, a conservative perspective, or anywhere in between. But just last year, the College Board decided to issue a long and very controlling curriculum framework that effectively forced everyone to teach AP U.S. history from a leftist perspective. The new curriculum was all about conflict by race, ethnicity, gender, and class. And of course, there was a lot about environmentalism as well. There was very little about America's distinctive national character, and a great deal instead about cultivating a sense of global citizenship. Political, diplomatic, religious, and military history were downplayed, and in many cases completely ignored, as were the fundamental principles of American government, principles like federalism and local control. The new curriculum made conservatives look irrational and mean, while liberals, of course, were made to look like heroes, and so on and so forth. Now, some of you may have heard that the College Board's new curriculum guidelines for its AP US History course stirred up a hornet's nest of opposition. And because of that, the College Board recently revised its controversial curriculum framework and claimed that all the problems had been solved. Well, the problems have not been solved. Far from it. Yet the College Board has removed some of the College Board has removed some of the most biased phrases from its new American history curriculum, but the truth is that basic leftward bias is still there. And not only that, but the entire effort at revision was mostly just for show. All the AP US history textbooks, all the course syllabi, all the teacher training materials, and the exam itself have already been changed to conform to the original hyper-controversial left-leaning curriculum. And all of that has stayed exactly the same. So the problem of bias is still there. And meanwhile, the College Board has come out with a brand new curriculum for its AP European History course. And sure enough, it's a virtual twin of the original hyper-leftist American history curriculum. The overwhelming focus is on the evils of colonialism and capitalism, with very little about the problems of socialism, or about religion, or about the development of the principles of representative government. The whole European history curriculum is a leftist college professor's dream, which makes a lot of sense because those are the folks who drew it up. But here's what's really new about all this, and what most people still don't understand. The College Board has decided to drop its usual minimalist course guidelines and issue detailed curricula for every single one of its advanced placement courses. So last year's controversy over AP US history is only the beginning. What's really going on here is that the College Board is using its government-subsidized monopoly of the AP testing market to create an ideologically biased national curriculum. This is a dramatic development. It's exactly the sort of thing that our constitutional system was designed to prevent. And yet it's happening right now, and there is very little public understanding or debate about it. Through the use of government subsidies, the advanced placement program has now expanded to cover 1/3 of all American high school students. So if you control the curriculum of the advanced placement program, you now control the idea about the meaning of this country, of politics, of society, of culture, and of character held by the 1/3 of young Americans most likely to shape the world we're all going to be living in tomorrow. In effect, David Coleman, the controversial architect of the Common Core, who, not so coincidentally, is right now the president of the College Board, is now in a position to dictate to the country an ideologically charged national curriculum. By means of the College Board's advanced placement program and aided by federal subsidies, Coleman has managed to make an end run around the curriculum-setting authority of state and local governments. So the concern that a national school curriculum could ultimately be used as a tool of cultural control by a single political faction is no longer just a theory. It's happening before our eyes. The only way to stop it is to create an educational testing company that can compete with the College Board, a company advised by top-notch traditional scholars. Competition in the AP testing market would restore true choice and accountability to the curriculum. Competition in AP testing would put control of our educational system back where it belongs, in the hands of state and local governments and the parents and voters those governments represent. I hope and believe that a new advanced placement testing company, advised by top-notch traditional scholars, will emerge within the next year or two. And when it does, it is critically important that government at the state and federal levels take steps to open up the educational testing market to genuine choice and competition. Otherwise, yes. Otherwise, not only will America's tradition of local government have been cast aside, but even the understanding of what our federalist system was and why it was important will have been lost. So, between Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, the Environmental Protection Agency's assault on America's energy production, the collapse of America's position in the Middle East, the deficit, the burgeoning crime rate, and all the other fundamental transformations we're witnessing every day, it's easy to overlook America's system of local government and what our children are taught about our history and our constitutional system in our schools. But really, when you think about it, aren't these last two issues every bit as important as all the others? In fact, if I had to point to a reason for most of the problems this country is experiencing right now, I would point to the cultural influences that are pulling younger Americans away from American principles. Principles which are not so much being thoughtfully rejected as they are simply disappearing from ignorance and neglect. If the new generation never learns what makes our country work and what makes our country great, then America will have lost its way. And the process of education has to begin, not only in our schools, but in our public debates. The two changes I've spoken about today, the weakening of local control by the Obama administration's new housing regulation and the creation of a de facto national school curriculum, should both be discussed and debated far more widely. For example, if the presidential candidates, who aren't here anymore, started to take up these two issues, I believe those candidates would get a great deal of attention from potential voters. This is a moment in which Republican and conservative voters and candidates are disagreeing amongst themselves about the best way to restore the good that so many of us feel has been lost in this country. Some Republicans say that what's needed is not more negativism about the president's policies, but a positive program of reform that will help Republicans reach out to new constituencies. Other Republicans and conservatives say that it's time to name without fear and then take a hammer to all of the Obama administration's fundamental transformations, all of the changes that have put what's best in America at risk. I believe we can do both. I believe we can present a positive program of reform while also speaking the truth about the very troubling and dangerous transformations this country now faces. And I believe that the candidate who best does both of these things will unite the party and take the nomination. And that would be the very best chance we have to restore and defend all that we value in this country.
Excellent. As we continue, this next gentleman is the CEO of Murray Energy, one of the nation's largest independent operators of coal mines. Murray Energy provides our nation with approximately 30 million tons of coal each year. Hoorah. Mr. Murray also has been an outspoken critic of the Environmental Protection Agency, and this is a script that I read. And they're meddling, that's what we're calling it, meddling in the affairs of the states. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a big round of applause for Robert Murray.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying here. You know I'm not running for anything, and so I'm going to make sure that your moments with me are well spent. I'm going to talk to you about a crisis coming in this country that is not understood. At least I don't know of a single senator, U.S. senator from New England, Republican or Democrat, that is getting this right. They're destroying your staple of life, and it is happening. I am an expert, 58 years on this subject. And that is, flip the switch off right now, and what have you got in here? My microphone is dead, the lights are out, everything stops. And that is what's going to happen to you from the policies of the Obama administration and our federal government. You are going to freeze in the dark. And they don't get it. There's no disputing that we have by far the worst president that we'll ever have. His legacy will be the greatest destroyer that we've ever had. But what he's destroying, ladies and gentlemen, that you don't know is reliable, affordable, low-cost electricity. It is a staple of life, and it is being taken away from you. And I'm going to explain to you how. By the way, there's a copy of these remarks out there on the table when you leave. I'm an engineer. There'll be a lot of numbers in there. I'm not going to follow my text. I live with this thing every day. I want to make this relevant to you. Your senators don't get it. None of them in New England. As to what they're doing to people on fixed incomes. I grew up very poor. They're not going to be able to pay their electric bills. People that manufacture a product for the global marketplace are not going to be able to. You don't know this is happening because you take for granted when you flip that light switch on that the electricity is there. The whole system is being destroyed. You know what I call it? I call it a political power grab of America's power grid. Has absolutely nothing to do with the environment. Look, if you wanted to change this country in a diabolical, if not evil way, get control of electricity. You just took the freedom away from all of us. And people are not getting it. At least none of your senators in New England, Republican or Democrat. That is what is happening. This I have spent 58 years on. This is a subject I know very well. You see what they're doing, ladies and gentlemen? The Obama administration, they're bypassing the states that are supposed to control electricity, the availability of it, the cost of it, right? You have a utility commission or a public service commission, right? They're the people who are supposed to do it. No, they're bypassing the states, the utility commissions. They're bypassing the House, U.S. House, the U.S. Senate. They're bypassing the law. They're bypassing our Constitution. And ladies and gentlemen, I am righteously angry because I'm an expert on this subject and I see what's going to happen to your children and grandchildren because of this federalism, this takeover for political reasons of America's electric power grid. There's a paragraph in my remarks about the company. You can read that. Let me talk about the first overreach. The so-called Obamacare Cadillac excise tax. May 1, I had 8,400 employees. Not large, but big enough. I built it by selling my children's toys, and by the grace of God, God put me in business. And I'm down to 6,100. Bothers me very bad, but the people I have left, you know they have the best health care benefits in the country, and you know I'm going to have to take them away from them. Because 1/1/18 comes the Cadillac excise tax under Obamacare. It's a 40% tax on the difference between $10,200 per individual and what the cost of my benefits are, and they're 3 times that. I can't pay these benefits and a 40% tax on it too, Mr. Obama and Ms. Pelosi. Remember what she said. Now that we've passed it, we'll see what's in it. Those were her words. So I have to take those benefits away from people that work very hard in coal mines of the United States. And they work hard. This is not the America that I cherish. It's almost impossible for me, particularly at my age, my wife, Brenda, will tell you, for me to sustain these jobs because of the regulatory rampage of our federal government. The coal mining jobs and markets in the eastern United States are now 50% gone. You say, okay, what's that mean to me? Coal-fired electricity, ladies and gentlemen, is 4 cents a kilowatt hour at the bus bar. The wind and solar electricity that your senators have bought into and Obama espouses is 22 cents a kilowatt hour. And you pay $24 a kilowatt hour out of your taxes to sustain it. If it weren't for your subsidy, wind and solar wouldn't even exist. Ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with Obama paying back the people in California and New England that build these windmills and these solar panels that help get him elected. And of course, they get them made in China. But they're making the money. Crony capitalism. It has nothing to do with the environment. Mr. Obama, this is a dangerous comment. He's now closed 411 coal-fired generating units in the United States. That's 1,000 megawatts, a 4 cent a kilowatt hour. He's also passing other regulations to stop the mining of coal. The Obama EPA alone, one agency, has now published 25 million words under this president in 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, that is 38 times the words in our Holy Bible. Think about that. One agency. You don't know it. Your senators don't know it. Be outraged. They know it. They're part of, I'm Kelly Ayotte. I don't step out here and get away from what the line is in Washington or whatever, what's popular. Today's coal production and sales situation is extremely dangerous. It's the worst I've seen in 58 years. Our electric utilities are not dispatching. I put a lot of power into New England. If I would rattle off we're the largest coal company in the world. I put a lot of power into New England. I could name the utilities to you and work with these utilities executives every day. They can't dispatch their power because of the ever-increasing regulations of the Obama administration. And that margin in the grid is getting smaller and smaller and smaller every day. And if we have another polar vortex like we had in 2014, Grandma's going to get cold in the dark. And people on the operating table are going to have to go to a generator. I'm not trying to alarm you. We got Obama alarming us on global warming and climate change. I don't need to alarm you. I'm not doing it. I'm an engineer. I'm telling you what is happening to your electricity supply. And right now, none of the nation's coal companies, the 4 cent a kilowatt hour electricity, are cash flowing. Not a single one, except for 2. Every coal company in the United States will financially fail. They'll either have to sell assets, restructure, or they will be in bankruptcy by the end of next year. That is dangerous for America. That's your 4 cent a kilowatt hour, not the 22 cent kilowatt hour with your taxes. Prior to Obama, 52% of your electricity came from coal. Today it's 37%. I have said for 3 years it'll go down to 30. People mock me, but it's playing out just that way. From 52% to 30%, that's your 4 cent a kilowatt hour. While he promotes the 5.5 times more expensive renewables, which get a tax from you. And you know what? Those renewables are only there if the wind blows and the sun shines. Think about that. Chairman of American Electric Power, one of my largest customers, Utility Commission of Ohio, is requiring him to be connected to 3,800 megawatts of renewables. When we had the polar vortex in Ohio in early 14, you had it here. He called on his 3,800 megawatts. You know what he had? 15. That was it. 15 megawatts. The sun wasn't shining, the wind wasn't blowing. And that's where Obama and his Democrat followers are taking you and his country. And I say to you again, electricity is a staple of life. Whether you're on a fixed income and poor like I was as a boy, or whether you're trying to manufacture a product. What's behind this destruction of reliable, low-cost electricity and the jobs in our industry? Again, I call it a political power grab of America's power grid. It's to get control of this country, to change society. It's social engineering. Has nothing to do with the environment. And people need to recognize it. And to get there, he's illegally bypassing the states, the Utility Commission of the states, the House, the Senate, the Constitution, and the law, and I'm going to show you. One of the most overreaching regulatory efforts of the Obama administration is their so-called Clean Power Plan. This is a blatantly illegal effort by the executive branch to use the Clean Air Act of 1971 in a way never intended by Congress to promulgate carbon dioxide regulations. I have 5 lawsuits. Murray Energy has filed them against the Obama EPA. They're styled Murray Energy. I've been joined by 16 of our states. 16 have joined our lawsuits in amicus briefs. But on June 8th, Court of Appeals, where our cases are being heard, District of Columbia, not ripe yet, threw our cases out. They're not finalized yet. You see, they haven't been published by the Federal Register. Well, Obama is supposed to have been, and his bureaucrats, appointed bureaucrats, nobody elected in this government. They're supposed to have rolled this Clean Power Plan out years ago, months ago. But they haven't because they're gaming it. They're compressing the time frame to when they're going to publish it in the Federal Register so the utilities and the states themselves don't have time to get into court and have their day in court and have their due process rights. They're compressing the time in which they're going to comply. Why do I know this? I know this because on July 29th, Murray Energy won a case before the Supreme Court, and others were involved, called the Utility Act. Supreme Court, 5-4 decision, overturned what the Obama administration was doing. But what happened is I won the case, and we won nothing for America. Because what did I tell you? Obama's closed 411 plants. The states had to comply in their state implementation plans, they call them. The utilities had to comply. So I won the case and won nothing. He's doing the same thing on the Clean Power Plan. They know exactly what they're doing. And this is something that hasn't been said in this conference that troubles me very much. Our American court system is not functioning anymore. It's far too slow. There's supposed to be checks and balances from the federal branch. There aren't any. And you see, the Obama administration knows this and uses this fact to the fullest. What a glorious mess we are getting into in this country. Again, we won the Utility Act on the basis that the Clean Air Act of 71 said you have to count the cost of the economy. You have to count job losses, what happens to the community. We won that case at the Supreme Court. One of my 5 cases against the Clean Power Plan is that very same argument. If the D.C. Court of Appeals follows the Supreme Court precedent, all of this global climate change stuff will be thrown out. But we got to have our day in court before they comply, because you know what? The Obama administration said, states, you've got to file your state implementation plan. Utilities, you've got to file your plan by 16. They're gaming again, and the courts are too slow. That checks and balances from the judicial system is not working, and we have a runaway executive branch. As an aside, so you know what it means to you, the Clean Power Plan will cost you $40 billion annually. Your electric bill will increase 1/3 by 2020 over what it already has. And 40 states will have double-digit increases, and New England, every state in New England is in that double-digit increase. Plus, the Clean Power Plan isn't workable. It's based on implausible and unrealistic assumptions for replacing affordable resources of electricity, because they're designed by the Obama EPA, and they don't have the competence or the expertise to be writing these rules. The costs of the Clean Power Plan are real. The environmental benefits are not. You can shut down every coal-fired power plant in America today, and you will affect our temperature 0.16%. I'm an engineer. I've studied climate change, global warming for 40 years. The scientists I listen to are in the mainstream. They don't have a political agenda. This isn't an environmental agenda. This is a political agenda. What did I say? A political power grab of America's power grid to get federal control to take away your freedoms. So the facts are you can shut every coal-fired plant down and not affect the temperatures. China emits in 1 month 800 million tons of CO. The Clean Power Plan reduces the CO 550 million tons in a year. 800 million tons 1 month, 550 million tons in 1 year. Even if CO didn't do anything but help plants grow, and it wasn't bad for your health, which it isn't, it's insignificant. It's all political. But they're teaching it in the schools. We now have to teach a carbon footprint. There is no such thing as a carbon footprint. It's a politically created hoax. This alarmism contrived by our federal government is destroying your availability, your reliability, and the cost of your electricity. There are many other areas that they're trying to eliminate the use of coal. We typically mine 300 to 3,200 feet below the surface in my 17 mines, Utah to Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and a lot of places in between. They've now passed a rule called the Stream Protection Rule that if there's a dry ditch on the surface, we can no longer mine, even though we're down there 1,000 feet. Okay, that's, you know about the waters of the United States and how bad that is for your farmers. But the coal industry, and we don't have all the allies that the waters of the United States has. We have no allies, just our industry, unless I can get out to folks like you and say, folks, this is what it means to you. Your low-cost electricity is being destroyed. You're going to flip the light switch on, and it's not going to be there. So, with the Stream Protection Rule, if we mine below a dry ditch on the surface, and underground mining of coal is the most environmentally acceptable way to mine coal. You don't even know we're down there. But he's eliminating it. This government is so out of control. People ask me, I'm soon to be 76 years old, and I'm working 80-hour weeks, and the government's creating that job for me because I have got 6,100 employees that are depending on me, and I can't quit because I see the destruction. Well, there's a press release attached to my remarks laying out on the table. I'm filing another lawsuit against the Obama administration, the Department of Interior, Office of Surface Money, on the Stream Protection Rule Monday. So you get a chance to see it before the media. How about that? And to try to shut them down. But you got to understand one other thing you don't see unless you live it every day like I do. The collusion between the radical environmental groups, the windmill makers, the crony capitalists, the solar panel makers, liberal elitists, some Hollywood characters, and the Obama administration. It's a revolving door. The people he appoints comes out of these movements and they go right back there. And there's collusion. I have litigation going on where we're undercovering. You think Hillary Clinton's emails are bad? You ought to see what we've uncovered between the U.S. EPA, the Department of Interior, the Department of Labor, and these organizations that are colluding with the government to snuff out reliable, low-cost electricity. It's all payback. It's all about money. But you see, we got it out there. It's in the courts, but the courts don't react. Obama knows that. Yeah. The Speaker of the House bounced off of him. The whole country's bouncing off of him. Reagan Obama's taken me back to 1776. And it started right here. Well, I'll continue to aggressively fight back against this political paragraph of the paragraph. By the way, it's in here somewhere. I want you all to know I'm an expert. The earth has cooled for 19 years this month. My last speech said 11 months. Now it's 19 years, 18 years and 11. It's cooled. Obama went to Alaska. You got this glacier melting. It's been melting since 1815. What he didn't tell you was the Antarctic ice cap is larger than it's ever been since they started measuring it in 1979. It has nothing to do with what you do every day or human activity. It's a natural phenomenon. It's sunspots. It's the tilt of the earth. So he's up there lying to you. Again, in front of this glacier. We can't have this for our children. What he's doing is destroying the most poverty-stricken people in America. He's condemning them to abject poverty because the percentage that they're going to pay for the electricity is much higher than any of you in this room are going to pay. It's all upside down. It's all lies. Well, I'm going to fight back. But it's not just, think about this, folks, from what I'm seeing, it's not just reliable, low-cost electricity. It's your economic security in this country. It's your state sovereignty. It's federal control of traditional state functions. When they asked me to give this speech, I'd already given this speech umpteen times. They knew what I would say here. I didn't write it for you. I see what's going on. I know my industry, and I care about America. The American public generally does not react until there's a crisis. That's the sad part of America. And you know when that'll be? When they get cold in the dark. And the lights go out, the conference ends, microphone's dead, lights are out, no windows, let's go home. It's unfortunate that that's the way it'll probably be. But ladies and gentlemen, this is a human issue to me. You see, I know the names of many Americans whose jobs and family livelihoods are being destroyed as he appeases his radical environmentalist, liberal elitist, Hollywood character, and some unionist constituents. Who are these people? Ladies and gentlemen, they're my employees. They're my folks. They're my employees. I see their lives being destroyed. All they want to do is work in honor and dignity. And if they own anything, it's their homes. And when two of them in a coal mining community lose their homes, they've got no one to sell it to. That's all they own. If they own anything, it's that house. So these people that just want to work in honor and dignity go to the negative side of the ledger for the rest of their lives. And they just want to work. And this is not the America that I cherish. I'm not giving up, nor should you. We have the law. Unfortunately, we don't have the court system. We have the science. That I'm an expert on. We have the economics. That I know. And we have cold, hard energy facts. And we have the Constitution, if we can get the courts to uphold it. Our cause is right. It's right for industry, our communities in America. It's right for our children and our grandchildren. We must use these realities to fight our opponents' intent on destroying coal and our wonderful electric power grid for their own bizarre personal and political ends, and that's what it is. We must continue to do whatever we can to overcome the insanity of our current federal government. Again, I'm not running for anything. God bless all of you. Thank you.
You know, so this will be the only really statement I make about all the speakers who appeared here today. I'm one generation removed from the coal mines of West Virginia. That's where my family comes from on my father's side. Listening to Mr. Murray, he is right. And isn't it terrible in this country that we spend so much time villainizing a man who came before you to speak impassioned about the fact that he cares about the people he employs. And it's a shame we villainize people like that. I think he deserves another round of applause. There is a patriot for you, ladies and gentlemen. And all I can think about is the last part of the Declaration of Independence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor. And that's what this gentleman has done. And you few who remained here for the end of the conference heard probably one of the most passionate speeches you are ever going to hear, and God bless him for what he is doing. Thank you once again, Mr. Murray. All right, we have a panel that's going to talk to you. I love the title of this discussion, Winning Back Our Country. The panel is going to be led by, of course, Emmett. We're going to reintroduce Emmett. Why don't you come on up here, Emmett? And he's also going to be joined by Anne-Marie Banfield, a great New Hampshire hero, one of not only New Hampshire's leading educational experts, but also someone who is cherished around the country as well. So Anne-Marie Banfield, Cornerstone Policy Research Action. And Jamie Gass from he's the Education Director, Pioneer Institute in Boston. Jamie? And they're going to be talking to you about winning back our country as it relates to education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And it really is an honor to be here. We're going to try to make this brief and succinct. And this is all about the federal overreach. What's happening in education is happening in department after department after department, and that's, in short, that bureaucrats in Washington, driven by special interests, are making the decisions. Those decisions get pushed down into the states. In education, they get pushed into the schools, and they do so without really state legislative consent. What happens is the state executives they turn away from the people. They look to the federal executive, and they take orders and money from the federal executive. They become more loyal to the federal executive than to the state legislature. So it's a perversion of our system. Let's start with Jamie Gass from Pioneer Institute in Boston. And Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Common Core, how that system was designed?
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank Emmett and the folks at APP. This has really been a terrific event, and I have really enjoyed working with him over the last 4 or 5 years on this Common Core issue. And I also want to thank Anne-Marie Banfield, who has done really just a tremendous job here in New Hampshire, going back several years, getting folks aware of what it is that Common Core is all about. So what Common Core is, and many of you folks know about it, is a set of national English and math standards that were developed by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Those are two organizations that, while they proclaim to represent states, in fact they don't. They represent the membership that is the governors and the state commissioners of each state. And really in about 2007 or so, these sort of loose sort of advocates of national standards and national tests that have been kicking around Washington, D.C. for decades finally found their moment. And that moment came with the Obama administration's Race to the Top, a $4.3 billion competition sponsored by the federal government that was intended to basically get states to sign on to their agenda items in exchange for competing for the money. And given the fact that states were fiscally beleaguered at the time, they found a lot of takers. In fact, 40-some-odd states gradually adopted. In Pioneer Institute, where I work, given that Massachusetts had seen really historic results in the last 20 years or so under education reform, we thought that Massachusetts had a lot to lose. Frankly, New Hampshire had a lot to lose, too. In the 20 years that I've been around K-12 education, most of the states were aspiring to be New Hampshire, because for that 20-year period of time, New Hampshire had really been number one in the country. Well, Massachusetts has made a lot of gains under education reform with high academic standards in English, math, science, and history, and charter schools and a variety of other high-stakes tests. And that's really what catapulted us to number one. So we thought we better look at the academic quality of Common Core, the legality, and the cost. And I'll kind of summarize it with this. The folks who are driving Common Core have never done standards before. And while they claim that they were going to be emulating the best standards in places like Massachusetts and Texas and in Minnesota and California, in fact, they ignored all the evidence. They cut the classic literature, poetry, and drama that was the secret to the Massachusetts success. They ignored the evidence from all the high standards, high-performing states and countries that have access to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade and really kind of top out at what they call Algebra 2 light. And then there are these 3 federal laws that they basically have brushed aside. 2 of them were signed by Lyndon Johnson and President Carter, hardly what you'd call Tea Party presidents, that prohibit the federal government from funding, directing, or validating national standards and tests, right? So they brushed aside the federal laws. And so the last piece of research we looked at was the cost, because in spite of the fact that 40-some-odd states adopted, in spite of the fact that there would seem to be kind of widespread support in 2010, most of the governors, most of the state budget offices, most of the Department of Education, the boards of education, and the state legislatures never did a cost analysis. Our cost analysis told us basically it's a $16 billion unfunded mandate from the U.S. Department of Education. For Massachusetts, my state, it's going to be $350 million to align our standards and our tests with qualitatively lower standards. New Hampshire, you're lucky, it's only about $100 million, right? And the thing that's stunning to me about this is that the U.S. Department of Education and the players around this, they haven't improved student achievement anywhere in the last 20 years, right? So they have this belief that if we have national standards and tests, that it'll catapult student achievement. The country just to the north of us, Canada, the country we probably have the most in common with in terms of legal traditions and culturally, they don't even have a national Department of Education. It's all the decision-making is based by the provinces. That really used to be the model in this country. And I think if we're talking about restoring federalism, or we're talking about taking our country back from unelected bureaucrats and trade groups making decisions that control what's taught in our classrooms, that is a good place to start. We need to get rid of the Common Core, and we need to begin to show these folks that we are directing our own destinies, not waiting for bureaucrats to drive it for us.
And Barry, why don't you talk about the quality of the Common Core and what it means to children here in New Hampshire?
Well, I think, first of all, if you're a parent, you've probably seen some homework come home, and you're probably going, I can't figure it out. How can my child figure this out? So I think what's waking up a lot of parents is that the fact that it's coming home and it's on their kitchen table. So we're seeing it in the curriculum, and you'll hear people say, well, it's just about a set of standards. I can assure you if this was just about a set of standards, you would not see the backlash that it has created amongst parents and even teachers throughout this country. What I'd like to also do is kind of give you a big picture of what this is, because Jamie does a great job of explaining the problems with the standards and the Common Core standards itself, but that's part of an entire redesign effort that's coming from the Obama administration. So you might say, you might look at it and say, well, there's a problem with the standards, and you would be correct about that. But this is just a part. So it's a redesign in public education, and if you're familiar with some of the European models, Germany, for instance, it's called a workforce training model. So it's got to be dumbed down because the ultimate goal is to put kids on a track. Are they going to go to college, or are they going to go to career? And so there's a lot of information. You'll hear a lot of complaints about the data collection associated with Common Core. And this is really called a redesign in public education. It's been dubbed Common Core, but the Common Core standards are just a set of standards right now. So if I go back and forth, if I call it redesign, it's because I'm talking about the big picture. So who would trust the government to tell us where our kids should go as far as through an education system, what track that they should be on? You're going to see a lot of surveys coming out trying to gauge the character and the personality of your children. And they're going to do a lot of these what's called psychometric assessments, and that's what we have. I think, Emmett, you asked, or somebody asked earlier, maybe it was Brian asked earlier about, who was aware of the Smarter Balance test that's in the school. That's the standardized test. That's the Common Core test that's in our school. It's an assessment. And an assessment is basically an assessing of your attitudes, values, and beliefs. So that's why you're seeing this uproar amongst parents who are refusing to let their child take this assessment. It's not an achievement test, the kind that we took when we were younger. So but all of it leads to putting kids on a track while they're in school. Now, some of this is still playing out. We even have some states that have passed legislation that your child has to pick a career path by the time they're like in middle school. Yeah, we've had states pass that legislation. So these are the things that that they're taking away your freedom. Liberal arts education, it's interesting because the money behind this is Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation. He's the one pushing Common Core. He actually argued against a liberal arts education, and Steve Jobs argued for it. But they're trying to pull in this workforce development model. So that's the big picture. So, because I think everybody sometimes gets bogged down in just the standards. We don't like the standards. But once you realize what the redesign actually means, then you can look for other things. Like we have competencies in our schools now. If you look at the U.S. Department of Education's website, they list, competencies. It sounds great. We're going to have our kids competent in these subjects. Is your child competent enough in global warming knowledge? That's basically when you hear about those things, can your child collaborate enough? Is your child creative enough? The non-academic these are 21st century skills. Well, you need 20th century skills first. You need basics. And so you're kind of pushing those aside, the basics. So that's the problems that we're seeing with Common Core. That's the problems that the parents are seeing. Most of the teachers are angry about this. But that's I wanted to give the big picture view of that.
And I think it's a lowering of the trajectory. I mean, here in America, what's behind this practical federalism forum. The idea is the sovereignty lies with the people and remains with the people, and that we want to educate children regardless of what job and career they go into. You want them to be thinking thoughtful human beings, people of substance in their communities, who can stand and participate in their communities and be leaders in their churches, their communities, and their country. That's what America is about, and we're lowering that trajectory. We're lowering what we're teaching them. By 8th grade, basically, Common Core is about 1 to 2 years behind what children in high-performing countries are learning. They're already off the pathway to being prepared to study the STEM subjects in college: science, technology, engineering, and math. That's how bad Common Core is. It locks children into an inferior education. In terms of English language arts, as Jamie said, we're pushing in a severe reduction in classic literature in favor of mostly dumbed down informational texts. We're not even teaching cursive writing. And we're talking about teaching children instead to be global citizens. So last year, my son, who was 8 years old at the time, went on a class trip to a NASA facility, a National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So I was pretty happy about that. So he's going to go learn, maybe this will heighten his interest in the solar system, the sun, the moons, the stars, the planets. And he came back with some literature. He came back with this from NASA seal on the back. It is a carbon footprint estimator. And it asks questions. And really, these questions are undermining my authority as a parent. These are all values questions. How often do you eat animal-based products? How often do you travel in a car each week? How often do you carpool? How often do you use public transportation? How many times do you fly in a plane each year? Do you save electricity in your home when possible? What type of house does your family live in? How often do you recycle? This is the federal government run amok. And this is a recurring theme in this conference. What we've done is we've grown the federal executive branch to be so large that there's no check or balance over it. Congress is incapable now of providing any substantive authentic check or balance. And it is even, especially in education, it's to the point where we can't even reasonably, as a citizen, sort out what's coming from the federal government and what's coming from the state governments. The policies are being pushed in from the federal government to the state executives, and the state executives adopt it as their own and basically pass that off to legislators as, hey, we looked at this is our view that this is the best thing that we could do. That's how Common Core came in. Initially, not a single state legislator even looked at it.
I want to kind of build off something that Stanley Kurtz mentioned and that Anne-Marie has touched on here too with this workforce development. So the uniqueness of this country. Alexis de Tocqueville was a French aristocrat. He came and visited the United States in the 1830s. He ultimately wrote a very impressive 2-volume history of democracy in America. What is the uniqueness of this democracy? Well, unlike his experiences in Europe and throughout most of the world, he observed that the uniqueness was that the citizens and civic organizations at the local level really drove most of the ideas and the decision making. That was the uniqueness. It wasn't like kings and queens and czars and ministers making decisions from on high, right? And no institution in our public life has played a bigger role in driving that outlook than our public schools. The reality of it is that whether you're talking about Thomas Jefferson or George Mason or John Adams, the state constitutions are lengthy and specific about K-12 education and the responsibility of future legislators to support and direct it, primarily to develop citizens, right? Now, what Anne-Marie has said really is true here, that there's a seismic shift going on. This push towards workforce development really is kind of more of a European model. President Obama several times in State of the Unions has talked about this, how we need to be emulating the way they educate kids in Germany where there are these specific tracks and that basically bureaucrats are picking and choosing and directing kids into college or career without really the input from parents. The folks that are driving the Common Core, this is their worldview. This is what they have been pushing for 20-some-odd years. Achieving the Council of Chief State School Officers, the Governors Associations, they're workforce development folks. It doesn't really matter what party you're talking about. That's their outlook. They think that they think incorrectly, that the function of K-12 education is not to perpetuate the principles of our constitutional republic the way the founders did. They think it's to establish a nationalized system so that bureaucrats can pick and choose and direct kids to particular kinds of careers or jobs. That's what they really believe. They've been overt about this for quite a long time. They've tried it in fits and starts, going back to at least the early 1990s. There's a report that was written by Mark Tucker. I know he's been in New Hampshire quite a lot in the last several years, but Mark Tucker is part of a group of folks that have really held this idea of sort of workforce development as sacred to the future of K-12 education. And he wrote a letter and an accompanying report. It's called the Dear Hillary letter. He and a handful of other folks who are still connected with Achieve and a lot of these DC-based players, they wrote a letter to then recently elected President Clinton and his wife. And they sent it to the governor's mansion in Arkansas in 1991 or 1992 before the inauguration. And what it did is it just outlined in lots and lots of details. It's a 60 or 70 page letter, and it maps out exactly what they're now trying to do, which is that there'll be a kind of nationalized outlook. They'll have a national database. They'll work in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Labor to have kind of nationalized databases on kids where they will be making the decisions based on what they think. I mean, the idea of it alone is certainly anti-constitutional. But the thing that's remarkable is that in the 20-some-odd years since they first began to push for this in the Clinton administration, they haven't had any success anywhere. The rest of the country, states like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, have just continued to do well, ignoring that kind of top-down approach, focusing on the liberal arts, focusing on high-quality mathematics, making sure that their kids have the same kinds of knowledge and access to the same academic content that the high-performing countries in the world. That's how you do it. And you make sure that the people who are paying for the work, and 90% of the funding in this country for K-12 education comes from the state and local government. The federal government actually has a very small financial footprint on top of the legal limitations on it. What we know from Massachusetts, and it certainly is even truer in New Hampshire, is that when state legislators and local elected officials can control this work, that you tend to do pretty well because, as the founders well understood, you want to have K-12 education serve as a kind of wellspring to perpetuate the principles of this country. So when Anne-Marie talks about this seismic shift away from not only federalism and a kind of limited view of what the U.S. Department of Education is supposed to do towards sort of workforce development, it aligns directly with what Stanley was saying in his remarks too. This is the tradition of our country, folks. If you lose this, all the other things, they don't matter. Because if they have control over the ideas that you're being taught to your kids, whether it's through the AP or the SAT or a couple of consortia, testing consortia that are controlled by the federal government, they just cut you out of it. This one really matters because all the other things that our kids learn about this country turn on what it is that they're taught in their schools.
So this big federal overreach started in 1965. It was the basic, what we now call No Child Left Behind. It was the first of President Johnson's great society programs. He got it through Congress when he had 2/3 majorities in both houses. And all we've done since then is just pass it again, and if not, make it worse. So when President George W. Bush took office, he reauthorized it under the name No Child Left Behind, and he made it more oppressive with more strings tied to the states. Now, Republicans have strong majorities in both houses. And what are we doing? We're reauthorizing No Child Left Behind. There's a rush. And I should point out, No Child Left Behind, the initial reauthorization ran out in 2007, 2008. So it's been unauthorized, officially unauthorized since then. Now the Republican leadership is in a rush to get it reauthorized and get it to the president's desk so he'll sign it. And they've said that. We want to get the president a bill that he will sign. So it's rather than wait a year for the next election and hope that there's a better president who's more respectful of the people and their rights. leadership is saying things like, well, we're putting protections in there to protect the states. The fact of the matter is, most of those protections were already in No Child Left Behind, as Jamie noted. They didn't do any good. Why? One of the reasons is there was no enforcement mechanism for the state. So tied into this, there's a basic privacy data collection law called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act that was passed in 1972, 1973. And it was implemented through regulations. In 2011, the administration, and then that law had a lot of loopholes. Nonetheless, in 2011, the administration essentially rewrote the statute by passing new regulations. It changed it from being a data protection statute to a data sharing statute. Now government can share your children's data, very personal data, with any other federal agency, any state agency, and with private entities, even private entities outside the jurisdiction of the United States. That was done in part to implement this redesign that Anne-Marie and Jamie were talking about.
So I want to just kind of touch on one thing. Has everybody heard of ACORN? Do you know that they're in our schools in New Hampshire? Okay. So they just cleaned up their act a little bit. Annenberg Foundation out of Brown University receives its funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the federal government. So what they do is, we heard about bypassing the states and going directly into these entities. So they go into the schools. So Annenberg Foundation has what they call the Nellie Mae Foundation, Nellie Mae Grants. And so what Nellie Mae does is they come into your school, or in the case of New Hampshire, they came into New Hampshire and said, here's some money. And our Department of Education said, oh, good, let's take that money. But what you need to do is you need to look at what do you sell for that money. Nellie Mae is in the Pittsfield schools. They're just... Wonderful news, Sanborn is up for a $100,000 grant. With that grant comes strings attached, and the only way that you can look at those is to do a right-to-know request, which I have done in some of the schools in New Hampshire. And when you get that when you get those grant applications, you can see exactly what the school has to do to get this money. Now, if the money is originally coming from the federal government and the money's come from Bill and Melinda Gates, who's controlling your school? It is not the school board. Because in that grant application, they are dictating how the teachers can teach in a classroom. Pedagogy, it's called pedagogy. So they're telling the teachers how they can teach. Now, some of these teaching methods, if you research the teaching methods, and you inquiry-based, you might see something like that going on in your school. A lot of those teaching methods, if you research it and you look at studies on those kinds of teaching methods, actually lowers academic achievement. You can look at independent studies on this. So not only are they bringing in these grants to your schools and controlling your schools, and your superintendent's telling you, isn't this wonderful, we're getting all this money, they're actually bringing in, telling your teachers how to teach. That's how controlling this has become. Your grade cards, they are now being controlled by the federal government. The federal government, we're having grade cards changed all throughout New Hampshire, and parents are looking at these grade cards going, I don't like them, I don't like what I see. They have no idea where this is coming from. So you got to follow the money. You have to look at your school. Where is the money? Start asking for grants. One of the things you can do is have your school board members go through every grant application and look at it before signing off on a grant application. Have your school board set up a textbook committee. Get parents on that textbook committee. So when the parents are looking at textbooks and going, I can't figure this out, maybe it's not a good idea to adopt that textbook. Now, they don't want you to do this. They want no part of you doing this. But a lot of school board members that I talk to, these are the suggestions that I will give them. Set up a textbook committee. Look at the grant applications. Your superintendent's not going to want this. They are going to be dead set against it. But the school board is supposed to oversee your superintendent. They need to go back to that. So just kind of want to tell you a lot of what's going on. So our Department of Education is instilling a lot of reforms in our classroom because they've got the Nellie Mae money coming into the state and also into the schools, and we have the No Child Left Behind waiver that we also had to apply for, and you can look at that online, and you can look at what we had to give up to get the No Child Left Behind waiver. So that's how they're doing it. That's how they're getting into the schools, taking control. If you think you have control of your school, you simply do not. You simply do not. And so I'm trying to tell you how we're losing that control. Do you have anything else?
I guess I'd kind of like to wrap up by talking a little bit more about the standards. So I mentioned that Massachusetts has done historically well. There's a test called the NAEP test, which is the nation's report card. It's been around for about 40 years or so. Every state takes it every couple of years. And they have reading and they've got math. They have science and history too, but the main key ones for our conversation is reading and math. The reason why Massachusetts in the last 5 administrations of that test has been number one in every grade tested and every category tested, and no state has ever done that before, was the deep commitment to classic literature, poetry, and drama in reading. This is enormous, folks. It seems like it's not a big deal. You say, oh, what does it really matter if my kids are reading history or informational text or these things in English class? It matters first and foremost because the purpose of education is to educate our young people to be human. And when you read books like Huckleberry Finn and you read Sherlock Holmes and Edith Wharton and Dickens and all these timeless texts, not only is the vocabulary and the stories something that the kids like, anyone who has children know how much they love stories, right? But they also bind us together as human beings. They teach us about friendship, they teach us about comedy, about tragedy, all the things that help make us human. And if you're shifting away from those kinds of not only proven 100 years of reading research makes it clear that those kinds of stories are the kinds of stories that help kids build vocabulary so that they're able to get to the day where they can appreciate, Shakespeare, or they're able to read the Federalist Papers because it's, written in, kind of more difficult 18th century language. That it matters in terms of the test, but it also matters in terms of the quality of these children's lives. It helps develop the kind of citizens that you want to have in your community, right? It teaches kids about the things that make us human. And so, there's a lot of details that you've heard about in the Common Core, and we'll continue to hear about the Common Core. But the way in which this sort of workforce development model, not only is it top-down, but my view of it is that it's fundamentally dehumanizing, too. Because children are not cogs in the machine. They're not human capital. They're not something to be sorted in databases at your State Department of Education or in the U.S. Department of Education, the Department of Labor, something to be sort of directed here and there by bureaucrats. They're children. They're an end in themselves. And the only way they're really going to be able to grasp the knowledge and vocabulary and history that's requisite to being a citizen is to read these kinds of texts. And when Common Core cuts it, it cuts something deep in kids that connects them to their families and to their communities. And I think that's why, in addition to the crazy math, which is really writing about math, not doing math, that as parents, and moms in particular, when Emmett and Anne-Marie and I have gone around the country, and we've been to 20-some-odd states or more, it's usually moms. 60-70% of the audience are moms, and they know that this math is crazy, but they know there's something wrong with it. They know there's something wrong with Common Core. It's why it's gone from inevitable to poisonous. That's what Jeb Bush, one of the biggest backers of Common Core, has called it, poisonous, right? That these things matter, and that's why I would strongly encourage you to continue to be active and get yourself educated on it, and make sure that your public official knows your displeasure with it. And you saw some presidential candidates, there's going to be more that are coming through your state. Let them know. Ask them questions. If they can't deliver answers, they're not the candidate for you. If they give you just the talking points, the 1 or 2 lines, push them. These are key decisions, maybe the most important. So that's my plea.
In my view, these presidential candidates have to be a lot more detailed about exactly how they're going to handle this situation. What are they going to do with the Department of Education? Fiorina was good today when she said that the federal government under her administration would have no role in mandating testing. But their hands need to be tied in a lot more ways as well. I think the conditional funding has to end. We have to make it easier for the federal government, for state governments and local governments to sue the federal government when there's overreach. And I think we have to make it clear that a state can pull out of a federal grant at any time it wants without having to pay back money. That was one of the recurring themes that we heard across the country from state legislators. What if we pull out of this federal grant or that federal grant? Is the federal government going to come after us? So these are things that these candidates have to spell out in much more detail.
I just, because I'm in New Hampshire and you guys are all in New Hampshire, I need your help. I really need your help. This, and here's the funny thing is my kids are not in the public schools. I've been doing this, and my kids have never had, well, I shouldn't say that. I think my son had a Common Core book in a private school once. But, I'm doing this because I just feel like it's the right thing to do. But I need help. So, when you see Congressman Ginter walk into the room, tell him we don't want No Child Left Behind reauthorized, things like that. Tell your state senators, tell your state representatives. The problem a lot of times is they want to fix something with something even worse. I mean, we almost had that happen in the last legislative session. They almost took out the Smarter Balanced Test and put something worse in by Republicans in our state. And we had to fight that. We had to fight Republicans. And that's what makes it even worse. So, I'm doing what I can do. We have a couple, I have a couple of school board members in here who are awesome. Get good school board members elected. Get behind them. This is something we really don't even pay close attention to. I live in Bedford. And my kids have never been in that school district, and those school board members in the last 12 years have heard from me on a weekly basis. A weekly basis. You know why? Because they're taking thousands of dollars from me every single year, and they're not even educating my kids. They're going to hear from me. So, you could pull your kids out of the school system. I say you do what's best for your kids, but let those school board members know what you think, and the ones that are good, I see a couple here in the audience, the ones that get behind them and support them and get them reelected and get some good people elected.
Wonder if you'll just excuse me for a minute and allow me to make a pitch. We have a new book that we just released this past Monday in Washington, D.C. It's called Drilling Through the Core. Why Common Core is Bad for American Education. You can buy it on Amazon. We are selling it well below cost. It's about $10. I brought about 10 or so up with me, and they're gone. But I'd encourage you to take a look at it. The thing that's great about it is that it's got chapters by accomplished scholars, Dante scholars, James Madison scholars, legal experts, economists, all breaking down the various components of it on the poor academic quality, the illegality, and the costs. I just want to make a pitch for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. How you guys doing? All right, so I do a morning show, and I did my morning show this morning, and my morning show starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, which means I am up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and this has been the day of days. And so I'm going to leave you this. You guys are the hardcore ones. Kathy, thank you for staying. You're the hardcore ones. How many New England Patriots fans do we have? All right. They won the Super Bowl, didn't they? Why did they win the Super Bowl? Yeah. Because the coach did something very simple, and someone said it in this audience. He stood before his team, and he said, "Do your job." Our government is failing because people don't do their jobs and they think they should be doing other people's jobs. And is it any wonder they screw up? Be a family and have one parent try to do everything. And what happens? Failure. The kid is left at school. Where's mom? Where's dad? Do your job. And that's what federalism is all about. We're not saying that government is bad. We're saying that each level of it has a role. Necessary evil. Thanks. Do your job. This is your game plan. This is your playbook. Our government has a playbook. It's the Declaration of Independence. It's the Constitution. And others. And they don't do it. You few. It's almost like I feel like saying Shakespeare right now. You few, you happy few, you band of brothers. You are my band of brothers. You who stayed here to the end. Everybody who came here to see the presidential candidates, some of people left. That's fine. We need allies in Washington, D.C. We need them there. But we should guide them. We should control them. Those people who left this conference early missed the most important part. The parts of who we are, what our government is. We live in a state with one of the greatest revolutionary generals of all time. Yet, we are probably the only ones who know about him. General John Stark, our motto, live free or die, death is not the worst of evil. He wasn't saying that you had to die. That's not what he was saying. He was saying that you have to do everything in your power to stop tyranny. If it's give money, if it's go to school board meetings, whatever it is, it's everything in your power. And how often do we not do that? But one of his greatest speeches was at the Battle of Bennington. He ignored the Continental Army's orders. He went to Bennington on his own because he knew where the battle should be. We need to go to Bennington on our own and bring the battle to them. And he stood. I can tell you, if you've never read the history of the Battle of Bennington, please read it. Because before them, it was the greatest battle. Yorktown was not the greatest battle. It was the greatest battle in the Revolutionary War because a bunch of people like you stood in a trench facing the most awesome army ever put before them. Highly trained mercenaries from Germany and highly trained redcoats. And they stood in that trench, and the guys at Granite Grok have heard me say this before because this is really the great one. And John Stark knew that he had to get those people going. He had to defeat this army because if he didn't defeat them, the cause could be lost. And he stood on that trench and said, there are your enemies. They are ours, or this night, Molly Stark sleeps the widow. What was he saying? You're it. You are the force. You are the few that care about this country. Worry not about all these empty seats. No, no, no. Worry not. Stand on that berm. Hold your sword high. Go to those town council meetings. Be the biggest pain in the butt you can be, or Molly Stark sleeps the widow tonight. It is not the many that are the victory. It is the few that create the success. That's who you are. We thank you so much for coming here. You've been an awesome crowd. Have a great day and take back your country. Thank you very much.
And that is the end.
Is supposed to come and sit with us, isn't he?
Well, this is the end of the formal conference. And yes, we are waiting for Mr. Stanley Kurtz to come over and talk with us for a little bit. He of National Review fame. He has written a lot on regionalism, and I think he was the one who woke me up to what is trying to go on with, well, we've written an awful lot about the 9 regional planning councils here in
New Hampshire. Yep.
Yeah,
why don't you do that?
Turn me up, Stevie.
You're turned up. You're turned up.
Okay. And Stanley Kurtz, if I'm not mistaken, was also the guy that did a lot of research on Obama in the early days and went to the libraries in Chicago.
He did.
Where they tried to shut him out, basically, because he found the stuff that was hiding in plain sight that told us the truth about the guy.
Yeah.
That is correct. That is correct.
We'll see if he remembers and comes over. Excuse me. All right, so hang in there. We have to find him.
So what do you think, Steve?
What do I think?
What did you learn today?
Oh, well, I learned it's a long day.
And this is true. This is very true.
It's really just kind of a refresher of things that I sort of already knew. And, of course, we've heard the presidential candidates speak before. Not Rick Santorum. I haven't seen Rick.
Oh, okay.
So that's the first time I've heard him do his presidential thing. But, a lot of the other stuff we've heard, it's not uncommon. But sometimes you get to watch it grow and develop, and it becomes a little bit different. And they add a few details, and it's interesting and entertaining and fun. And, of course, great speakers.
With you, brothers.
See you, Warren.
Yeah.
Good-o.
No, but it comes close for us.
Broadcast silence. So, a couple people that I'd never heard from before, so that's good. Let's see.
Certainly Mr. Murray was
Emmett and Sean and, Robert Murray. Very energetic. Ha, ha, ha.
Yes.
Of course, Stanley Kurtz. And so it was good. Good to have. You need people to come and refresh you and get that information back in your head. And we just recorded it all.
And, of course, this means a whole lot of work that I can't do.
Well, there's a lot of post-production here.
Yes, and given that I am getting on the airplane on Monday, there's no way I'm going to have all of this done.
Well, you have it. We have it.
We have it, yes.
I have to get the audio ready for 2 hours of audio ready for the rebroadcast on the Rock NHC on Monday, which I'll do tomorrow. I'll just have to pick and choose some stuff. And
well, why don't we pick and choose some stuff, Steve? It's all on Ustream.
It's all on Ustream, and you can download it from Spreaker. All the audio's there, all the video. I mean, if you don't want to do video, if you just want to do audio, I mean, we have plenty to work with in multiple formats, so we're definitely good. But it'll all get broken up into sections and posted individually when time allows. There's nothing time sensitive here really, except for maybe presidential candidate speeches, which you may or may not have already heard. So a lot of the other stuff is important, but it's not like if you don't know it by next week, it's expired.
No, a lot of this stuff is forever type stuff.
It's principles. It's basic foundational ideas applied to these topics that were discussed today.
And even the presidential stump speech, by and large, they're hewing to the same principles. They're just given their version of how they're going to do it, and every one of them is talking, constitutional restriction of the federal government, which is good.
Yes, sir, we are.
Yes, we are. Come and talk.
Well, we are waiting for Mr. Kurtz.
Yes, we are.
Maybe he's not coming.
Well, I thought I saw him. Isn't that him over there?
That might be him.
Talking to the gentleman in the red plaid shirt.
Yep.
So apropos for New Hampshire.
He does look like he's almost pointed in this direction.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that'll be good because, we wouldn't normally have him on as a guest.
Correct. Although we should ask if he would come on, because I think this whole nonsense, and that's probably very much the wrong word, nonsense. It's terrifying, actually, of regionalism and what is going on. I mean, we've talked about this.
It is the complete planned destruction of this constitutional republic.
Yeah, and we have...
among other things. This is a multi-jawed administration.
Let's see, what do they call it in New Hampshire?
Sustainable Communities Initiative.
No, the name of the...
Granite State Future.
Granite State Future, yes.
Yes.
People thought I was awfully hard when Cruz came to our house, and I told the young lady from the some sort of planning association that she was not welcome. That her kind of troll wasn't the kind of question we wanted asking. We wanted to get good answers to real questions.
I think you were perfectly right to do so, because even though I'm quite sure that Senator Cruz would have
handled it well, we had people with good conservative questions that needed to be answered.
Correct. Although it is something that we probably do need to talk about more when we get the chance to talk to some of these presidential candidates. Although, I'll tell you, with the way that the polls are going, folks that we might have been able to talk to before, not so much anymore.
They're getting, the good ones are getting busier and busier, and in the meantime, the front runners. Heck, guys, it won't be long before Jeb Bush is anxious to talk to us.
That is a great way of putting it. That is,
meanwhile, Fiorina, Carson, and Cruz are getting so busy that they're hard for us to book.
Right.
I haven't talked to Carson yet, but we've talked to the other two a couple times.
I've got recordings of Carson doing the Q&A, and he didn't do bad. Early on, he tended to wander off the reservation because he sort of just did his deep off-the-cuff thinking, and occasionally went down a rat hole. Whereas now, I think he's got the hang of it. He keeps his eyes open, and he's got some thoughts, some ideas already worked out. Anyway,
hello, sir.
Stanley Kurtz is joining us.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you. You've done a great job.
Take it easy. Yes, sir. Now is a great time. Just have you grab the headset, and we'll check your mic. And
so is this a live interview on air?
It is. We are live streaming.
It's live streaming, and it'll be parceled up and podcasted.
Audio, video, live, and then podcasting. So, yep. Yes, sir.
Please.
We'll be able to hear you. Oh, thanks. What's this one? Okay.
Wait, there's only one. One is turned. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Let me try that.
It should work.
Excellent.
All right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. There we go. There we go.
Without the aid of a cell phone.
So regionalism is a great subject for us because we have the Granite State Future. We have 9 regional
planning
commissions that do all kinds of ill and damage much as they can. We videotaped a few of these. You've got a room full of like 30 experts sitting around a table deciding things for which they've never been elected.
Do you have a grant from this federal grant from the Sustainable Communities Initiative?
Yes, and it goes through the Nashua Planning Commission and gets spread out to the other regional commissions. We've been writing about this for years.
I see.
Not as well as you have at the national level, trust me, but we try to go to some of these things.
Town by town fights, town councils. You go in, they bring in their HUD guy, is a Republican, used to be an RNC committeeman. We know him.
Right.
He goes in and pitches the HUD side. We send activists in to convince people of the evil, more or less. And it's a town-by-town fight. We've been pretty good.
We've actually won. But it's like anything else. When you have federal money behind you, and all of us have regular jobs, we do this as we're well past a vocation and a hobby. This is an obsession.
Right.
But it's hard to keep the same people motivated because there's so many things coming at us all at the same time. It is overload by design.
Yeah, so this is cloud and priven of the people by the government.
I agree. And as I was saying in the talk, this new rule, this affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, is going to give the federal government tools to help fight people like you, to help squash you down. It's going to be harder to stop. So, for example, I said in the talk that once a locality has to fill out this incredibly detailed form with where everyone lives in the census tract by race, by ethnicity, by language proficiency, every category you can imagine, and how much access they get to what are called community assets, meaning to high-quality schools, business districts, everything else. If there's any discrepancy, then if you want your federal funding, the feds can say, well, we need you to do something for us. And what might they say you need to do? They might say, we really want you to sign on to the plan being formed by the Sustainable Communities Initiative group over in Nashua or wherever it is. And that's a lever they're going to use. And they're also going to be more likely to sue. What really happened to Westchester County in New York is that they got sued, first by a civil rights organization, then the federal government jumped in and said, you're not affirmatively furthering fair housing, because every time that you take federal money, you have to sign a promise as a municipality that you will affirmatively further fair housing. So
we've had him on, the county commissioner, who's been at the forefront of that. He's been on 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Really? He's been on 4 or 5 times. And I mean, he's a good guy. We don't agree ideologically, but he's right in that our local control is being taken away. And look what happens. And even though Westchester is a pretty well-to-do county, yes, especially compared to us up here in rural New Hampshire, yes, which I want to come back to in a second.
Yes.
I mean, you cannot fight that sheer weight of billions or trillions of tax dollars. So I have 2 questions for you. One, obviously, in the regionalism, they're trying to recapture the tax money from the white and black flight out of the urban areas. Mm-hmm. We're rural, mm-hmm, pretty much. Our largest city is only 100,000.
Right.
We are 98% white.
Mm-hmm.
What would they do to New Hampshire? What can they do to New Hampshire other than trying to still... I just have this strange idea that if given the chance, they'd still try to take one of our small towns, 570-odd people, and still try to do a rack and stack.
Yes. Well, that's a fabulous question, and I haven't written enough. I've focused on the suburbs.
You have written tons,
right,
sir.
But I haven't written enough about the rural, which is what you say, and I can't give a perfect answer, but there's some things I can definitely start to talk about. I did write about King County in Washington State. Now, King County in Washington State doesn't exactly have a formal urban growth boundary like Portland, but they have something close to it. And the people in the rural areas outside of King County who are trapped in this growth boundary, a lot of them are depending on their retirement, say, to sell some of their farmland. And they can't do it. They can't do any kind of development even if they want to stay on their farm. And I'm not talking about putting in housing development. I'm talking about just certain kinds of basic improvement that you would want to do on your land. You literally can't improve your own land. So it turns rural people who are in proximity to the growth boundaries into unfree people who aren't able to own or dispose of their own property.
Couldn't that be taken as an illegal taking?
You would think so, and maybe there are lawsuits being planned against it. All I know is that there have been very intense protests by rural people who are just on the rural side and on the wrong side of the growth boundary in King County. And let me say something else, because this is interesting. Now, this isn't exactly rural, but it is about smaller size cities and towns. Have you ever heard of Dubuque? Dubuque in Iowa. That is not a very big city. And there are a lot of other towns out in Iowa they call river towns who are near Dubuque. And what's actually happening through the Department of Housing Urban Development is, and it all mimics this affirmatively furthering fair housing idea, that the Dubuque is having to take public housing tenants from Chicago.
What?
Yes.
I was unaware of this.
Yes. And of course, Dubuque is in Iowa. It's not even in the same state. So the federal government is capable of drawing a kind of regional boundary. And so in Dubuque, they originally had categories of who gets a preference, and they would assign points if you get a preference to go into public housing. And they gave most of the preference, understandably, to residents of Dubuque because they pay the taxes. And then they put the next level of preference onto residents of Iowa. And anyone from out of state had the lowest level of preference. Well, the federal government came in and said, well, there's a higher proportion of African Americans from Chicago trying to get into public housing in the larger region. And therefore we deem racist your point system. And now you have to take people from Chicago. So if the federal government decides
that, and I'm afraid I'm going to flunk New England geography here, but even if there are large metropolitan areas that are close to New Hampshire but outside the state, and you get pulled into that region, then under
Boston.
Okay, if they could, because Boston it must be as proximate as Chicago is to Dubuque.
It's only an hour. So, yeah.
So theoretically, that's something that could happen here.
Wow.
I was when you were talking about this fair housing thing, I started doing some Googling and came across H.R. 2577, which is the Transportation Housing Urban Development Bill. It was an Appropriation Act. It passed the House with an amendment that would defund that particular thing. But now it's just sitting somewhere in limbo, correct?
Yes. Congressman Paul Gosar sponsored an amendment in the House that defunded the affirmatively furthering fair housing regulation and various other parts related material. And Senator Mike Lee in the Senate has a similar bill. I wrote about this, and you can Google it. I can't remember all the co-sponsors. It's interesting. One of the co-sponsors of Lee's bill is Rubio, and he's the only presidential candidate I know of who's jumped in on this issue. I haven't heard him actually talk about it. And so you've got the you've got the Gosar amendment, which is passed. You've got the Lee amendment, which is proposed. But my fear is that if Congress ends up resolving the current budget impasse with a continuing resolution, they don't go back to regular order and actually pass appropriations for particular departments, this will all go away. And it's possible that there'll be backroom deals in which the Republican leadership says, well, you can have your continuing resolution, but we insist on X, Y, and Z. But frankly, I doubt that they're going to take a stand for the Gosar amendment unless there's a big public outcry, which I was doing my best to stir. But when you're talking about a continuing resolution for the entire budget, it's likely that. So the truth is, if you want to know what practical thing, one practical thing is what you're already doing. You're going to these meetings and you're giving them opposition, these planning commissions, and that is so important. But I have to say that another tremendously important thing right now that every municipality should be thinking through is whether they should be taking any money at all from housing and urban development. Now, it's very unfair to go and tell someone, well, you shouldn't even take the federal money because municipalities do depend on this. The taxpayers pay their taxes, and they're being, shorted very unfairly. And in the long term, I don't think we can sustain it. But in the short term, if you want to save yourself from this completely overreaching federal control, you better think twice as a municipality about taking that HUD money.
I was on my town's budget committee for a couple of cycles. And when I first got in, I went all of us are techies at Granite Rock, so I went through and just reshuffled the data just to take a look at past budgets and where things were going. And I'm looking around at nobody's using this. Why are we spending money for this? Oh, this was built 50 years ago with federal money. If we take it down, we have to pay it all back. Exactly what you said before. So I tried to launch ideas of, then why are we taking all this money? And I found all the federal money. And it was just amazing. At the state level, it's not as big at the small local level as it is at the state, like you said. But it was amazing on my budget committee. We had 12 members.
And Guilford's not that big.
No, 7,400 people. That's it. But we've got 13 members. It was amazing. People kept saying, it's free money. We have to take this. It's free money.
Right, really.
And I kept saying, look at the strings attached. I've just said.
Right.
And you guys can't get it through your thick heads. Right. I was not the most political kind of guy. No. That's why I'm not on the budget anymore. But I tried to wake them up to say, look at the damage it can do. Look at how it constrains your current and your future spending. Right. Like our $300,000 sidewalk that goes nowhere. Now we have to start buying special machinery to keep it free of snow.
Right. And you see, all you have to do is take $1. Doesn't matter how few people and how little money. If you take $1, then to take it, you've got to sign this form that says, we agree to affirmatively further fair housing. And since Obama has now defined affirmatively furthering fair housing to mean the federal government gets to tell everybody where they should live, you are signing over control of your locality. And if you don't do it, even if it's $1, you risk more than just having the feds cut off $1. They could sue you.
One of the most exasperating things and probably the most unheralded Supreme Court decision this past session was they called it constitutional. I don't get this.
Yes, the disparate impact Supreme Court decision in the Texas public housing case really opened the door for this affirmatively furthering fair housing regulation. Now, I think the main reason the Obama administration has waited until the last few months to release this regulation is because it was politically a hot potato, and they kept moving it past every election. And there were thoughts by the housing advocates it would come out even in the first term, kept pushing it back. But I also do believe that part of the reason they waited until they finally did to release it was they were waiting to see what would happen with that housing decision. If the housing decision had gone the other way, and a lot of people expected Justice Kennedy to oppose this disparate impact idea, the whole affirmatively furthering fair housing regulation would have been something like a dead letter. But with this terrible decision in the Texas public housing case, that opened the door, that green-lighted this tremendously powerful regulation, and people still don't know about it, so they're in danger of applying for the HUD money, and they've got, get this, they've got about a year and a half to go through all the applications and write all of the explanations of their demographics, and then when does the enforcement start? Right after the new president comes in.
But can he take that out? Can we see, with the change of administration, him going at the very least saying, put that legal document on the shelf, let it collect lots of dust, end of story? Or can he actually break those? Or start a process to break them?
Well, you said he. I was thinking of President Hillary, you see.
Yeah, there is that.
The truth is that a Republican president is the real solution to this. The weakness of Obama is that he did this. It's just like Senator Cruz said today, live by the pen and the phone and die by the pen and phone. Obama has overreached. This regulation is ludicrously outside of his real powers, but he's done it by regulation. So a Republican president gets in, then he could just eliminate this whole affirmatively furthering fair housing.
We're going to have to pack up real soon and get out of here.
Okay,
so
but
one more.
Will they? And can you get all of these termites that are in the regulatory woodwork, do you think?
I think AFFH, this affirmatively furthering thing, can and will be stopped by a Republican president. I really believe that. The Democrats have been sheepish about it, actually. They don't like to talk about it because they know that politically it's bad for them. You look at Westchester County. That was a liberal Democratic county in New York, and it flipped over to the Republicans, to Astorino, in significant part because of this issue. And that when they write amongst themselves, they worry that when people really understand what's going on here, I don't think a Republican president could let this go through, and I think we could raise a groundswell that would make it impossible. I'm very optimistic if a Republican president gets in, but if Hillary gets in, she will have the tool that she needs. Although Obama's clever, because Obama himself waited to put this in place and start the wheels rolling until all his elections were done and all the Democrats' elections. It would be tough for a Democratic president to enforce this sharply. Another thing is that Hillary's often discussed potential vice presidential running mate is Julian Castro, who is the head of HUD. He's the guy in charge of actually enforcing this. So it would be very interesting if she ran and picked him, because I think this issue would come right into the heart of the presidential campaign.
All right, Stanley Kurtz, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. We have to pack up and get out of SNHU before they kick us out.
One last question. Sometimes it's hard to find out how to contact you when I see something in the National Review. How could we get a hold of you? Would you be willing to come on our regular Saturday morning 9 to 11 East Coast time show?
Sure.
Because this is a great conversation.
And we could do this by phone anytime, Stanley, and we'd love to.
Sure. You can read all my NR pieces, unless I forget. I have an NR email that I monitor very carefully. Comments.kurtz@nationalreview.com. Just write me, and we'll set up another interview. I'd love to talk more about it. I'm delighted to find people. In fact, after I did my second Obama book on the suburbs, I found some of the most informed people on these issues as I did my radio tour, because it's the local people who really understand this. The experts on the federal level don't really know this. The people who live with this and who know these planning commissions, they know all about it, and I always learn myself when I talk to them.
The people inside the federal bubble on what I call the planet of Trantor have no clue. So you guys all got what I meant. Have no clue what's going on out in the real world, the damage that their policies are doing, or the damage that just allowing this to continue is doing. It's terrible stuff. And by the way, all of your research, I read your early stuff when Obama was first rising in the polls, and I really, really appreciated your work in Chicago, and I wanted to say that.
Well, thank you so much. What's bad for the country is good for me in the sense of at least I don't have to feel as though I was totally wrong.
That's true. All right, well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. We appreciate it.
A pleasure, a genuine pleasure.
Thank you. All right, that is it. We got to pack up and get our butts out of here. And thank you so much for listening. And we will talk to you next week from Nashua, New Hampshire, Crown Plaza, and the Republican Liberty Caucus. We're out of here.